Kiru Balson is Senior Sustainability Consultant at Building Services Engineers Max Fordham. And Max Fordham has been at the forefront of low carbon design ever since the firm was started by Max himself. And I think that's his house behind you, isn't it, Kiru? Can you tell me a little bit about that before we start the interview proper?
Yeah, that's fine. So the house, Max's house itself, as you can see, the aim is how do we deliver a scheme that is not only sustainable in terms of the material selection and how the architecture can deliver a comfortable home, but at the same time, a home that is energy efficient and sustainable. So it's such an efficient project in terms of the building envelope, its ventilation systems, and how the windows are reduced to optimize heat loss, etc. In terms of how well it's working, this year the project won the Building Performance Award. And I can go on to talk about the technicalities of the design, but in principle, it's a scheme that performs in practice.
Very good. So on the broader issues, as the industry is becoming more aware of reducing embodied carbon, how does your role fit into the work of the practice?
Yeah, so I'm a sustainability consultant and I have architectural technology background. And the team in Max Fordham, the sustainability team, is a multidisciplinary team with broad range of skills from architecture, structural design, material science, and health and well-being. So we look at issues in an integrated design thinking process in its true sense. So embodied carbon is not an issue in isolation to how we design and what outcomes we want to achieve from projects. So talking about my background itself, prior to joining Max Fordham, I joined in 2020. Before that, I worked at BRE for over 10 years, where I had the opportunity to look at the process of sourcing materials and how BIM could enable that process of capturing data and understanding what future reuse potentials could be. And also I've had the opportunity to look at the energy efficiency and how the operational carbon could be reduced. The sustainability team is integral part of Max Fordham services, where we are putting net zero delivery at the heart of every single project we do. So materials is a significant component of how do we design and deliver sustainable buildings. So that's where I come in as someone who has got a sort of in-depth understanding adequate enough to challenge and ask questions from first principles. Is that going to deliver the right outcome where we want to be, and that is sustainable and viable over longer term?
But I think, I mean, it's often the case, isn't it, that material efficiency and low embodied carbon aspirations aren't often sufficiently prioritized during design development. So why do you think that is, and how do you integrate these requirements into the process?
So the awareness of embodied carbon, although people have been looking into this issue for over 15 years and campaigning for consideration of material impact, it's the climate emergency has really brought this agenda front and center. Over 3/4 of emissions in the lifetime of building comes from its materials, how you build it, how you refurbish it, and what happens to those materials when it comes out of the building. Interesting thing is the construction industry is well aware of the environmental impact of material production, and there has been efforts to address this. But the problem is the rate of change that we need is significant, both in terms of how we manufacture materials and how we source materials. in the UK, the concrete and steel industries have got a lot of work to do. How we are going to supply low carbon primary materials that are still in use. And also we have to ask ourselves why the UK imports more wood, second to China, in the whole world. Yet we send at least 1% of construction waste is wood, and it goes to landfill. So that requires a significant rethink about how we deliver projects and what are the wider environmental as well as economical benefits in terms of creating green jobs and so on. So that's the broader context. But if you look at the specific reasons behind why embodied carbon is still a sort of is a requirement, but it is not a primary requirement as such, because it is not, there's no requirement, regulatory requirement to address embodied carbon in the UK. For example, building regulations been successful in bringing operational energy and reducing operational carbon in everyone's minds. But embodied carbon is not regulated. And if you think about how many products are in a building and how many supply chain industries are working towards it, we have only what they call as the environmental product declaration. That's a certificate telling you how much carbon is emitted from a material. We have only for 10,000 products. So that's because there is no requirement, regulatory requirement to make the supply chain sector to give you that information to the designers so you can make informed decisions. That's one of the reasons. And also there is a broader sort of skill shortage in who is going to produce these certificates and how quickly one could get hold of these certificates if you're a manufacturer is also a challenge. Another reason is that it is how we approach aesthetics in buildings and what materials we specify and how we define value and cost comparison. It also has an impact on making those low carbon material choices. What we are doing is that in terms of how do you integrate these requirements is setting the brief right from the start. And currently we are working with clients as their design team is developing solutions. We are driving how do we do the optioneering process that optimizes the energy use intensity of buildings, at the same time looking at how do we reuse materials either on site or off site. Giving a clear brief at early on gives us direction and driving better solutions. In what I have seen is that there is a radical think is required from project teams about how we specify products, what do we specify in the first place, and how the QSs price them and provide markups. So what's the long-term value of these products? So there are, if you look through all of the chain of connected issues, one needs to look at it very carefully right from early on and make informed decisions. That's the only way to tackle this.
Of course, I mean, the circular economy ideas are now embodied in the London plan, aren't they? And you carry out circular economy and embodied carbon evaluation. So what are sort of key lessons you've learned from your work?
Yeah, the first and foremost thing is to reduce material demand. How do you do that? Have efficient building form. What I'm talking about is how many surfaces you have in your building and how do you optimize that in such a way that you not only reduce the heat loss from the buildings, but if you reduce the heat loss, you also reduce the amount of insulation you need to put in the building to make up for it, what you're losing. So if you have an efficient form, you need less materials in the first place. That's lesson number one. And the second thing is that what the London plan has sort of brought to everyone's awareness, we need to know what you have in hand. So what I'm talking about here is, how do you look at the buildings that are being demolished to make way for new buildings? It's happening everywhere, but that pre-demolition or a material survey before it's stripped out or demolished has to be a meaningful process. There are still gaps between design ambitions and expectations on commercial return, and incorporation of secondhand materials. It's changing, but we're at the beginning of a curve. The third lesson is engage. We are engaging contractors right at the start of thinking about how we're going to get our concrete. You don't leave it till the main contractor comes on board. You as a design team understand what has worked, what someone else is doing, how can we deliver a low carbon scheme right from start, not get to stage 4 and realize actually it's not affordable and you replace everything for business as usual. To give you an example, in one of our recent projects, we had a brilliant contractor with whom we could collaborate to reuse over 200 light fittings from another scheme, which was going to be demolished, and get it recertified, warranty approved, and rehoused in a brand new refurbishment project we are working on. So that goes to show that it is possible to reuse materials. You have to be at the right place at the right time and have the technical ability to explain to the client, to say, these are the risks, but it's a managed risk. How do you do that? So those conversations and engagement needs to happen everywhere across London. Every single housing scheme you go, they've got rooftop solar. What is this, the roof, the structure for that PV panels? How much steel is used? I haven't looked into this, but in this scheme I'm talking about, we reused steel from another project and from a supplier who's involved in the oil sector. Loads of pipes, they've got adequate stock with warranty and approval. So we reuse them for solar PV support. So it's about being creative and engaging the supply chain early on to understand where are the potentials and what could we do about it. Circular economy, the big thing one needs to ask is, how do we manage risk? The issue is still that we don't have a process of approvals and warranties for secondhand materials. And that means procuring these materials and understanding the technique, how far you're prepared to take risk on as a design team is a challenge. And how do you deliver it cost effectively? Because you have to take it off the building, you have to store it somewhere, you have to get it certified and wait for the contractor to reuse in another project or in the same building. That is a long process. I can go on and on, Peter, but the most, I think everyone would agree with me that we need better data. We do embodied carbon analysis, we do work with teams to develop a circular economy strategy, but the data on environmental impact of materials is significantly lacking. If you are specifying a brick or a block that it has recycled content or made of natural materials or something looking to reduce carbon, you don't have the EPDs for these products. You end up still having to use generic EPDs for what is business as usual. It's hard to show the value of how much carbon you're reducing as a result. Hopefully that gives you a sort of a broader summary of the key sort of trends and lessons we are learning through our work.
Very good. And of course, I mean, refurb and retrofit is a major component of the construction sector now. So how can the sector really adopt to circular economy approaches in that context particularly?
Yeah, well, approximately 60% of construction output is new build. 40% is refurbishment and maintenance. And if you try to put some scale to this, demolition sector is about £1 billion industry. I know it's not as big as construction new build, but nevertheless, £1 billion industry is offering a huge potential on how we engage with this sector as a design team to implement circular economy in our projects. Heart of the matter is how we perceive aesthetics, and are we prepared to accept minimal finishes in resi projects where false ceiling is the key everywhere you go, have a look. And how do we allow materials that speak for themselves, whether it is rammed earth or timber? So I think a redefinition of how we integrate these materials into our building has to be understood clearly. There are lots of new low carbon products emerging, and there are social enterprises now coming up to reuse. If you're stripping out a building, there are umpteen organizations. Before you even do anything to the building, they can go and take a lot of the stuff out of the building for reuse for free. So where is the QS's cost benefit analysis if you don't allow for that? This is where I talk about how do you put value to these things. So key is think before you put together your demolition work package. Do you really need to do that? Are there alternative ways to enable reuse before that building comes down? Ideally not, but that is the reality. But I know that MMC is one of the key means of delivering affordable homes at the scale we acknowledge we need new homes. That means we need to not only modernize how we make buildings, but also how we demolish buildings and refurbish buildings. Like in the project, one of the projects we are working on, we looked at, okay, you've got a building, you've got all that service life in the building. How can you refurbish it effectively using natural breathable materials? So you complement what's already there and developing technical solutions that complement a building and reduce its embodied carbon further over long term. Another broader sort of point to make here is not just a technical thing, but I do think circular economy should be looked at it as a job opportunity. The government Green Jobs Task Force estimated there's potential to create over 200,000 low carbon jobs between now and 2030. But one big thing is the skills shortage to enable circular economy and net zero. And it is a massive challenge. What I would ask whoever is at base or anywhere else, looking at the specific green jobs options, why not target 10% of new low carbon jobs to develop a supply chain that purely enables reuse of materials, develop opportunities for testing these materials, and put in place digital infrastructure to create a market for material reuse in future. That will give the confidence the design teams need. At the moment, everyone wants to specify reused materials, but they don't know where to go. They don't know if it's going to work. It's just you don't know enough about the materials. That needs to fundamentally change. And the demolition sector and the design sector are currently in isolation, and they need to come together from early on in projects to start making this happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. I think that's something we should do at the NLA and bring those two sectors together. Kiru, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on this. It's been fascinating. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.